Laban. We are back to watch the Fantastic Beasts series.
Oh, joy. I am just over the moon.
You should be.
Why?
Because you get to hang out with me and we're in the same space.
Okay, give me more reasons.
Because we are already made it through movie 1.
Okay, there we go. Progress. I'll take progress as a good reason. We are, in fact, going to be discussing today Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, the 2016 first installment of the newest franchise in the Wizarding World canonical universe. Do you remember watching this movie in the theaters?
I do. I remember seeing, because they did the fan event, and my friends really wanted to go see it on opening night. So I went by myself solo to the fan event 2 days prior and didn't tell any of them, and then went to it again on opening night.
What do you remember feeling in the lead up to the movie?
I was excited. It was exciting to have new content coming. And at that point, we didn't know how it would tie into anything. We kind of had a vague expectation beyond there will be Beast and Hufflepuff representation.
Is there? We'll get into it. Yeah, I saw this at a movie theater in Northern Virginia with my girlfriend at the time. I was excited. I don't think I was necessarily like jumping out of my chair, but I was excited for it. Yeah, so before we dive into how we felt about it, we'll do our typical round of fast facts and trivia that we've been doing for these movies.
Okay.
So this movie was directed by David Yates. David Yates being the man who directed Harry Potter's 5 through 8, Order of the Phoenix through Deathly Hallows Part 2. Cinematography is by a man named Philippe Rousselot, and I'm really sorry to all the French speakers out there who know that I butchered that name. He's worked with Guy Ritchie, with Tim Burton, has a long history in French cinema. Fascinating choice for cinematography. The music, I'll call that out in this episode because I thought the music was really well done for this. Music was by James Newton Howard. Some of the cast, we know them, we love them. Eddie Redmayne, Catherine Waterston, Dan Fogler, Alison Sudol, Ezra Miller. Some really, really strong performances in different spots by John Voight, Colin Farrell, Ron Perlman has a voice role in this. Dani, this movie came out in 2016. Would you care to guess how much money this movie grossed commercially? Would it be A, $800 million, B, $816 million, C, $839 million, or D, $943 million?
I'm going to go with B.
Which one was B?
819?
816.
16.
You would, in fact, nope, you would be incorrect, mainly because I forgot the number. The correct answer in my mind was B, 816, when in truth it was actually 814. You are correct, but also incorrect. That's because I was incorrect. This movie grossed $814 million commercially in the box office. Would you care to guess where this movie fell in the top 10 of movies in 2016?
3.
You would be very incorrect. This movie finished 8th in 2016.
Dang.
Would you care to have a guess at any of the other movies that would be up there?
2016. We're in the height of Marvel, so I feel like there should probably be some Marvel out there somewhere.
Okay.
I don't know which one.
Okay. Anything else? So, number 1 in 2016 was a Marvel movie, Captain America: Civil War, bringing in $1.15 billion in the box office. Number 2, Rogue One, a Star Wars story. Disney had a great year in the box office in 2016. Top 5 all went to Disney. Number 3, Finding Dory. Number 4, Zootopia. Number 5, Jungle Book. Universal squeaks in at number 6 with The Secret Life of Pets. Number 7, Warner Brothers enters the fray with Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And then number 8, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them.
I'm a little bothered that Batman vs. Superman beat out Fantastic Beasts. Fantastic Beasts is a much better movie than that.
Yeah, Fantastic Beasts, for whatever reason,
Like, I'm okay with the other movies, but that one, I'm like, oh.
Are you okay with Zootopia and The Jungle Book and The Secret Life of Pets beating out Fantastic Beasts? I'm fine with a Marvel movie and with Star Wars. And I can make an argument for Finding Dory, maybe. But this is Harry Potter we're talking about. I know it's not Harry Potter.
Well, and that's why I expected it to be higher, is because all of a sudden the fan community had another thing to gather around. And in 2016, we didn't have any issues going on really at that time.
Well, we had our own issues going on in the world in 2016.
Yes.
The Harry Potter universe, hyper specifically, did not have any overt issues to discuss at the time.
Yes.
Fair. 2 questions for you. I guess 2 questions in and of the same. What, as you recall, were your reactions after seeing the movie the first time in 2016? And then fast forward to sitting here today, how did you feel after watching it for this?
When I first saw it, I enjoyed it. I love Newt's character. I love the creatures. I still actually enjoy it. I will say I probably watched this more recently than I had the Harry Potter movies before we had rewatched them. I don't rewatch like Crimes of Grindelwald a lot, but this is like a normal plane movie for me. Like, it's a nice, safe time length for a lot of my flights. So I would watch this one a lot on flights. What about you?
Well, how did you feel after watching it now?
Watching it now, I still like it.
Yeah.
Like, I still enjoy it. I still enjoy the pacing. Like, yeah, it has its issues. It has even more issues now that there's like another one after it, and the story's just very convoluted. But I still I enjoy the characters. I really like the characters. I wish they had a stronger story that had a better flow to it. But I like our main characters. I love Newt. I love Jacob, Tina, and Queenie as a foursome.
I did not really enjoy this movie coming out of the theater in 2016. Not because I thought it was bad. It didn't hit my areas of interest. Back in 2016, particularly, I wasn't yet part of this global Harry Potter fan community. Not that necessarily changes what I like, but it certainly changes my perspective. And so then I was like, I'm an indoor cat, as I like to say. And so I don't really care necessarily for like a bunch of creatures. Like, that doesn't do it for me. Was
your ex-girlfriend a fan of like the series?
Yeah, she wasn't like Harry Potter, like we're Harry Potter, but yeah, she knew.
Well, I just know like sometimes that affects your
no. She knew her stuff.
Okay.
No, I mean, I didn't have like a connection to the creature side of things because I'm the Hufflepuff who would hate herbology, right?
Yeah.
The whole New York thing, I just wanted to be at Hogwarts. I wanted to be in the British Ministry. I didn't at the time have too much of a strong affinity for the universe that was being depicted in this movie. Having watched it more in recent years, and then especially through the lens of having seen Crimes of Grindelwald, I really like this movie. I think it might be fairly high up my list, higher than maybe I gave it credit for when we did our rankings at the end of Deathly Hallows Part 2. I agree the characters are really, really well done in this movie. I think a lot of their motivations are made very clear and very strong. And even if the plot line itself overall isn't the strongest, I think you can trace characters' motivations and their subsequent decision-making through it all. I thought...
we know where they're going.
Yeah. I thought the music was really dang good. I thought the cinematography was beautiful. Yeah, I liked it. I'm excited to talk about it.
All right. Well, let's kick it off.
Yeah, the music as it opens is grandiose. It's cinematic. It's like a big... It feels like if you ever, whether you've had done this in person or you can just imagine it in your mind's eye, sitting down to see an orchestra play. And the conductor gets up, lifts their baton. And then all of a sudden the strings are going. It's cinematic. It's enveloping you. It's taking you and grabbing you by the collar and saying, we're going on an emotional journey here. And it felt like hey, we know we haven't put out a movie in, at that point, 5 years. Welcome back. Let's strap in together and go for a ride.
What I also liked about the opening was I love the newspaper flyby because we already knew going into it was a different time period. But the newspaper was kind of setting what was going on in the wizarding realm at that time. So you kind of were getting the glimpses. Okay, there's a lot of issues going on in Europe with Grindelwald. There's a lot of issues with Muggle, not Muggle, Nomad, wizard relations.
We're calling it Muggle. I'm sorry.
That's fine. Muggle wizard relations in the U.S. specifically.
Listeners, you call it whatever you want. No hate for those who call it Nomad. It does not roll off the tongue for us. No. Sorry. So immediately we're set up with Newt as a very socially awkward person, someone who quite literally physically shirks away from making kind of proactive contact with other people, doesn't like looking people in the eye, right? Seems to not necessarily be at home in his own skin, which is an interesting choice to set up the person who is presumably the protagonist and the main character on this journey kind of as your avatar for the audience. It was a fascinating choice. So one of the things I was thinking about, I'm curious how you feel about this, if you have any thoughts on this. I was thinking about if I were casting Newt Scamander before we saw Eddie Redmayne's performance, who I would have went with. Do you have any thoughts on that whatsoever? Because it's the ultimate hypothetical, and it's hard to get his performance out of your mind's eye because, of course, you've seen it. So that shades how you view the character. But based on what you knew about Newt Scamander before we saw Eddie Redmayne, how do you feel about his portrayal?
I don't know if I could think of someone else because I love his portrayal. I think people love him so much is that he's actually more relatable than other characters we have met. Like a lot of other characters come with a lot of bravado and confidence in who they are. And it's rare for you to see a lead character to not feel like you see the ones that are socially outcasted in some way, but not necessarily because of how they are individually. It's more so the circumstance that they are within that sets them apart, not necessarily who they are as a person that kind of sets them apart.
Yeah. I was thinking, I asked the question because maybe it's the peculiar haircut, the nicely tailored long coats, the time period piece of it all. Newt Scamander through Eddie Redmayne is soft in a warm way, despite the fact that Newt shirks away from a lot of human contact. He has tons of humanity.
Yes.
Which makes him warm. And I was thinking they could have very easily went the other direction. And the name that pops into my head is Cillian Murphy, right? Someone who's really able to portray. Dani's looking up Cillian Murphy. Cillian Murphy plays the Scarecrow, the guy with the gas in Batman. He's the lead in Peaky Blinders. Uh-huh. He's going to play Robert Oppenheimer in an upcoming movie. He's someone who I think would play a very different Newt Scamander, but I think someone who could really do a little bit jaded for whatever reason from society and from people, right? Has this affinity with a very certain group, in this case, creatures, right? Anyhow, it's just something that came up in my mind.
It's an interesting thought.
It's not that for the record, I thought Eddie Redmayne did phenomenal. This is not a criticism. Unlike the Potter films,
it's not a choice we would normally see as a lead.
Yeah. And unlike the Potter films, where, with the exception notably of Michael Gambon, right, we don't have too many character replacements, if any, right? We have the Patil twins, et cetera, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting to think about. We know Newt Scamander wrote this textbook. It has to be somewhere to find them.
Yeah, but we have no book content on this character.
So that's all we know. So we know he's someone who theoretically loves creatures, and that's really all we know. That said, you can start to make assumptions and conclusions from there. And so it's interesting to see how they being the screenwriters and the producers, to develop his character out from that very little source material.
Yes.
So next, we're at that crime scene, the exploded house. Percival Graves, Colin Farrell walks into our lives, brooding and powerful. How do you feel about Colin Farrell as Percival Graves?
I think he does great. I think he sets up a great character that you don't necessarily. So the thing about that character is you don't necessarily dislike him or hate him. You don't see him as a villain, but you see him as wanting power. But he doesn't bother you, and you're okay, I know this guy isn't he's not the good guy, but I'm not put off. He's not like Umbridge where you're just immediately put off by them. You're like, he's likable in his own ways, but he has this very business-like, professional aura to him.
Yeah, he almost reminds me in a way, before, of course, the ultimate reveal at the end, of Ray Fiennes' character in Bond. He replaces Judi Dench, right, as 007's boss. Someone who you're meant to be conflicted by because he's dark, foreboding, plays by the rules seemingly, right? Like, is very strict, right? And that's kind of and ultimately in the end, Bond finds is the good character, Graves ends up being the bad one, but similar construction, right? In that you feel like you should dislike him, but you're not seeing enough to be like, he's the bad guy. You definitely don't like him.
It's more like his personality just kind of rubs you the wrong way. You're like, yeah, he's not the type of person I'd hang out with.
Do we want to talk about casting of Grindelwald now or wait till the end?
Let's wait till the end because that's when he actually appears.
Okay, cool. And for the record, I'm just going to say it now. We're not going to go into a whole Johnny Depp deep dive here. We've talked about this on the podcast ad nauseum. There's a whole episode where I ranted to Dani sometime in 2021. Go to the back catalog, check that out. But similar to the Cillian Murphy thought experiment, I do have a couple questions I want to ask around Colin Farrell, Mads Mikkelsen, and just get your reactions to. So, listeners, that's called a teaser. We'll get to that at the end of the episode. What's next?
The Niffler and the bank. It's the second Salem MERS. There's an ERS at the end there on the steps, and you see Newt running past, and he bumps into Tina. It's our first time seeing her. What do you feel about them?
I don't really.
Nothing.
I got more on them in a little bit. There's another scene that I think really hits it home for them. But Jacob shows up. Hello, Jacob. Hello, Dank. The case swap thing, I really love. One of the things I love about this movie, and I'm sure there's more examples that I didn't write down, but in my head I kept feeling like I was seeing them, is it reverts back, and maybe this is because the cinematographer, Philippe Rousselot, right, is a very classic French cinematographer. There's a lot of choices that feel very classic, like Hollywood cinema, right? Like it feels like the case swap. Mm-hmm. That's one of the oldest plot devices in the book, and it's brilliant every time.
Yes.
Right? And that happens here, right? And maybe I'm getting wrapped up too much in the fact that it's a period movie, it takes place in the 20s, right? So it feels classic and old, and I don't know, but I really liked that. Like, it was just like they had to make this happen, right, for the sake of the story.
Yeah.
And they did it, right? Occam's razor. Easiest answer is usually the right one, right? They didn't overcomplicate it, which I thought was fun. Yeah, so inside the bank, a lot of stuff happens with Jacob and Newt.
I love their little initial reactions.
Yeah, I wrote down a lot of quotes from this movie. This movie, maybe because the characters were so strong, I guess also the writing was seemingly strong as well, if I'm writing down a lot of quotes. But hey, Mr. English guy, I think your egg is hatching. Yeah. It's just a great line.
I like the one where he's like, I don't know it for word, but he's like, you're here to try to get a loan for a bakery too?
Yeah, that so many good little comedic moments.
But it was a great foundation for the start of their friendship.
Did you catch the music that plays when the egg is hatching? And there's that close, pan in right on Newt and Jacob.
No, I did not.
Hedwig's theme.
Oh.
Hedwig's theme is softly playing, which I thought, again, James Newton Howard is the guy, the composer who did all the music. Mm-hmm. I thought he did a very nice job of mixing in some Potter music, like John Williams-esque tropes. So, for example, we took a break midway through the movie because we made some dinner and everything. And as I was walking back from dinner, I was singing out loud, double, and you said, wrong movie. But the reason I was singing that was because somewhere in the middle of this movie, there's a melody that plays, and it's not that exactly. It's a little bit off cadence, but it was very similar.
So you kind of get the throwback.
So throughout this movie, I thought they seeded kind of the original Potter music nicely, just to be a subliminal kind of, switch in your mind. Be like, oh yeah, this is a Potter movie. There's no Harry Potter, but it's a Potter movie. World.
One thing I will mention is Newt's wand is one of my favorite wands. It's actually the first one I ever bought. I had to get it from Noble Collection because the parks weren't selling it when I really wanted it.
I bought it at the parks.
Well, you got it after I did.
I'm just saying. Haha, I bought it at the parks. Makusa, very cool looking.
It is. Oh, I like it feels very New York. I love like the gold on the staircase, the house elf shining wands.
One thing that they don't explain in this movie, and they certainly didn't in Crimes of Grindelwald either, is the physical glamour of America's statute of secrecy, right? Because in the UK, we get it, right? You step into Diagon Alley through the leaky cauldron, right? Blah, 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 right? We don't get necessarily, like, we're not explicitly shown how the glamour works for Makusa for any of these places.
It just seems like another New York building that people walk into.
But is it like something like 12 Grimmauld Place where it's physically not there?
Or like the hospital where
it looks like an abandoned storefront. Yes. Like I'm curious about that. Mm-hmm. I still think it was, I'm not a critic. I was like, I wonder, right? Because Tina talks to the doorman as they're walking through. And I was just curious about how all the magic behind that works.
Yes.
Then we get President Pickery and Graves doing a bunch of plot exposition. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you what, I was going to save this for later. President Pickery might be more incompetent than Corny Fudge. She had Grindelwald as her head of her like law department for like an indeterminate amount of time.
Well, and it's funny because in that big like scene where they have all the people there, she's like, she mentioned something about the people that let Grindelwald escape.
Yeah.
And then they pan over to Graves at that, but that's further down. But
yeah, like I have another one later in here where I'm like, she's deeply incompetent. Where is it? Oh, yeah. When at the very end of the movie, when Pickery's like, we need to contain this, otherwise our whole world exposed and we're at war. But then you get down there to the subway, and every Muggle reporter in New York is sitting there with their cameras, and she has no way to obliviate the whole city because she doesn't know that Newt's got this. She is so incompetent. I'm sorry. Like,
no,
good performance, whatever. The character, not the actress, the character is deeply incompetent. Anyhow. That had to be said. When Newt says, I'm writing a book about magical creatures, that's for listeners. Have you ever seen from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the gif of Leonardo DiCaprio's character pointing at the TV screen when he sees himself on the TV screen, Rick Dalton? And he's like, oh my God, that it was like, oh my God, that's it. That's the book. That's the movie. Here we are.
And then on top of that, with Tina's response, it sets up how Newt sees the world versus how the wizarding world sees the world of these creatures.
Yes.
That she's like, oh, how to exterminate them.
Yeah. Next, this happens a lot throughout this movie, but that Modesty child, one of the creepiest characters I've ever seen.
She is, and they're specifically trying to get you to think it's her.
Right. Anytime you get a child doing like incantations and chanting of anything is creepy.
Even when it's hopscotch, it's just
my mama, your mama, sitting on a swing. Like The Grudge, like terrifying child, really well acted, terrifying child.
Kids are creepy.
That's the lesson, folks. Kids are creepy. Next, I really wanted to point out, because we talked a lot throughout the Potter films about how I thought they were too tinted and too filtered, and the coloring got all screwy.
Yeah.
When Tina and Newt are walking through New York on their way to Jacob's apartment, I'm presuming, the color there was really nice. And again, maybe this is because I'm used to seeing grainy videos of the 20s in black and white, but they sap all the color out of the rest of New York. And you get the colors of Newt's jacket and scarf and Tina's hat and her jacket. And your eye just goes there. It was, I thought it was beautiful.
And I'll say this movie, it's a very beautiful movie to watch. The CGI is very good. Like the technology they used with all the creatures.
I had a question about that. Not that you know the answer, but it's an open-ended question. In that, with the Potter films, a lot of the effects were practical because that was kind of a byproduct of the time they were filmed, right? Like Hogwarts exploding throughout Deathly Hallows Part 2 is mostly practical. There's a lot of CGI and some stuff because, but like a lot of the castle literally exploding was literally exploded on a set.
Yeah.
With all these different things where there's houses exploding and Creedon's doing his thing, I was curious how much of that was practical versus special effect.
I'm not sure. That's a good...
Because now because in 2015 when this movie was made, obviously they had the technology to do very seamlessly rendered special effects.
Because I know with Frank, there's a behind the scenes thing or something where it's Eddie Redmayne talking to the puppet of Frank that's green and being like, oh, I need you to put more pressure. So as she's like stroking him. So like, that's one of the thing, like behind the scenes things I've seen that I think about in there, but the other ones, I'm not sure.
I've got to say, and this is maybe a theme, although I understand why for Tina. For President Pickering, I don't understand why she's so incompetent. Tina is not very good at her job. I understand why, because she's pressing, right? She just got fired.
You can tell she's on edge in her energy.
Like an athlete who's been slumping, they just are trying their hardest and they're trying too hard and they keep making, I understand why, but Tina doesn't have a backstory prepared for when Abernathy says you were with the Second Salemers. If you just got fired for being around them, you have a backstory ready.
Yeah.
Right. You have a cover story, people. When they're sitting in front of Jacob's apartment, right, and it just all exploded, she loses Newt in like a second. She's an aura. Her job is like to track people and to be like a police officer.
I mean, he almost escapes out of her apartment, except for his sister.
That's what I'm saying.
Knowing.
She's pressing too hard. It's like I get it, but she's not good at her job in this movie. She's really not.
But I kind of like that energy from her, though.
It works. I'm not saying it works. It's good, but I'm saying she's bad.
Yeah.
Like, she's very skilled when in the moment when things happen, but like
she responds well, but doesn't have like.
If I said to you, "Hey, this person's a cop. They're going to stay with you and make sure that you don't go out of their sight," and then you ditch them within 5 seconds.
Yeah, that's rough.
It's not a good look.
No, that's a really rough one.
I'm curious when we go into the newspaper, the Shaw newspaper headquarters. Did you feel any sort of did it resemble anything you'd seen before?
It felt very like general politics. I know it's more your realm of.
Well, no, this is actually more your realm. It felt like what I recall in my mind's eye because I saw it when I was a kid. To the. Does Peter Parker write the Daily Bugle or is that Superman?
Daily Planet is Superman.
What's the Bugle? Is that Spider-Man? I don't know. Anywho, point is, it reminded me of J. Jonah Jameson's office and the Spider-Man newspaper.
Yeah.
Like a very large, like very 1920s.
Yeah.
Right. Anywho, it felt very similar. And John Voight, who, let's be clear, has some very questionable political views in real life and is not necessarily a role model for people, is a great casting in this role as Henry Shaw Sr. Like nails the conservative, loves the firstborn, disappointed in the second child without having to say too much. Like just looks like an angry man.
Yeah. That part of like the storyline always just to kind of.
It's a necessary evil's the wrong word. It's there to move the plot forward.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But I thought it was a good casting.
Yeah.
Next I had Tina, Newt, and Jacob walking when Jacob is kind of losing consciousness, kind of. Dan Fogler is phenomenal.
Oh, he is.
Like the groans he makes, the way his physical acting, he lets his body kind of be pulled, where like he lets the top half be pulled and the legs kind of drag after. It's really good stuff.
He's like muffling, but you can actually tell what he's saying.
Before I go off on a loving soliloquy, we get Alison Sudol as Queenie.
Before that point, I want to put out, I love the throwback to the Neville lollipop scene with the demiguise.
Now that you say it, I go there. I didn't even catch that. Yeah, that's good. That was good. That's
all I really had to say with that, but I just really enjoy that because it's also like it gets stolen from Neville because Harry's in an invisibility cloak and they use demiguise hair to make, and not Harry's obviously, but to make invisibility cloaks.
Look at you bringing in contextual outside knowledge. I guess there's a first for everything. Am I right?
Hey. That's mean.
That was mean. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Queenie, what do you think about Queenie?
I love Alison Sudol's portrayal of Queenie. one of the things that she has spoken about is that when they initially were casting her, they were looking for like some blonde bombshell, little ditzier, I would assume. But I love her choices in that type of character because it's also a very juxtaposed to Tina is a very different feel. What are your thoughts?
Oh, she's perfect. She's like Marilyn Monroe before Marilyn Monroe. She is. I think she's just pitch perfect in. Never mind her beauty, but her intonation, her accent, the way she uses her eyes, her smile. So she was like, yeah.
Every choice. She helped write the song, and that's going on in the Blind Pig, something like that. Something with the pig.
When she says, don't worry, honey. Most guys think what you was thinking first time they see me. Like, it's just great.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I love most about that entire scene in their apartment is, and this much has been made about this is far from an original thought. So, for what it's worth, but the way that you get to see magic for the first time through Jacob, it's like us watching the movies or reading the books again for the first time. Like the way the plates are flying, the cups are going, the food is being made, stuff's being chopped.
And her responding to his thoughts. So like the strudel or pie and then him finally being like, can you stop like doing that? Like, I'm a cook. This is what I do. And this is the best, like just how he, and even like with the clothes on the line, like it's like everyday magic that you don't, like in Harry Potter, they're all learning things. So you see a little bit at the Weasley's house, but this is a little so different because it's just like how they kind of live everyday life.
Yeah. One note I had from, because you were just touching on it a little bit a couple minutes ago, right? It's fascinating to me, like they make this distinction, right, in this apartment scene that Newt isn't cowed whatsoever by Queenie, right? Like Jacob is completely just slackjaw.
Yeah.
Newt is a little bit trepidatious. Like he doesn't really like he does not, the way she uses her charm and everyone else falls in line does not work on him.
No, and you could tell like his main goal is to go get his creatures, is to go find them before they are injured. And he doesn't really care about what's going on. And even it's not like necessarily in his character, but even her saying, after he says that she's a legilimens, and she's just like, oh, I can't read your kind with the accent.
I'm curious, what did you think the point was when they're in the case and Newt swings the swooping evil at Jacob and then he smirks? What did you think was the reason behind that?
I think it was just a way to introduce this creature that will later on be used again.
Yeah, but they couldn't introduce the character. They couldn't introduce that creature in any.
They could,
right? Because they go on to do a whole tour of his case just 5 seconds later.
Yes,
so
but
I guess let me rephrase. Specifically, why do you think the choice was made not just to introduce the swooping evil, but to do it in a way where Newt smirks? Because I have a whole theory on this that.
Okay. My thoughts will probably not go with your theory. My thoughts are probably along the lines of because he was like getting the venom, and he mentioned that he thinks it will become a very that it's a potent thing that they think they can use for other things, and it was just kind of like part of his daily ritual of taking care of all the creatures. And at the time, he was also like mixing up drugs for Jacob. But
yes, that's all wrong.
That's fine.
A couple scenes later, when Newt and Jacob are walking through the streets of New York, I believe on the way to the unintended jewelry heist, Newt says to Jacob, I was watching you at dinner. People like you, don't they, Mr. Kowalski? I think, because it's not just that you introduce swooping evil, it's that Newt smirks after he does it. I think it's Newt's way of flexing, because he was so deeply uncomfortable and felt, I don't imagine it's a stretch based on at this point in the movie what little we know about Newt to say that he wasn't the most beloved child at school. He was probably teased a fair bit, right? Sitting at that dinner table, projecting a lot here, but Jacob has this whole flirtatious thing going on with Queenie. Newt probably feels out of place, uncomfortable a little bit, maybe put back into that childhood frame of mind again where he was teased. So when he gets into his turf in the case, he's able to take this seemingly terrifying looking, swooping evil death insect bird thing and then smirk because he's like, I got the power here. I'm flexing here. To me, it felt like I'm back in my comfort zone. I just want to show off a little bit because you just showed off unintentionally, but you just showed off up there. So I don't know. That's where I went with it.
I don't necessarily agree.
Okay, well, you're allowed to be wrong.
Oh, I'm allowed to be right also.
Well, you're allowed to be right. You're not here, but you're, No, but genuinely.
No, I understand where you're coming from.
Because I think they're setting up further with that, right? They're showing the differences in connection between someone like Jacob and Queenie and then Tina and Newt, right? And that whole scene in the kitchen upstairs exists to show that Jacob, the odd man out there, is actually the one who fits in better than Newt. Right? And then Newt goes down into his case. It's like, this is my comfort. This is my home. Right. This thing that I brought upstairs, you into this place. Upstairs was so normal for me, but I felt out of place. Yeah. It was very weird for you, but you felt at home. In this case, this is bizarre beyond bizarre for everyone else. I feel normal here. Yeah. And when Jacob watches Newt go into the case and goes, wow! Like, really good. I love the entering the case scene. Yeah. It's just a fun little dose of magic that, like, the case sends you back to, like, Hermione's bag that you never, like, quite got to see, like, what it would look inside. And then you get to go in this case and it's literally a whole world. One of the celebrations, they had the 3D thing where you could, like, be in the case. I don't think that was the year I was there. I can't remember which year it was. The year I was there, they had Slughorn's chair. Yeah, no, they had, like, some 3D thing where it, like, looked like you were in the case. I love the way that Newt had little snippets of clearly continued conversation with his creatures, right? So it was very obvious and evident that conversation had already happened. Like, it was in media res, right? You picked it up right in the middle as opposed to the beginning. Yeah. Which was really nice because it shows a lot of depth of backstory there. Yeah. Which I thought was really fun. Yeah. And then Jacob has so many good lines inside the case, right? I don't think I'm dreaming. I ain't got the brains to make this up. What did you do today, Jacob? I was inside a suitcase. Like, a lot of really good stuff. And then, like, the conversation with Pickett, because I love Pickett the Bowtruckle. As opposed to Pickett the... Yeah, like Bowtruckles in general. Okay. So then we're going to the jewelry store. I think that scene is just so much fun to watch. Yeah, I put hilarious. That's what I put on mine. It's just such a fun thing. And then when he Accios the nippler and his pockets just, like, everything's just flying. It's a curious cinematography choice because it puts it in the slow-mo, which then... Are we as viewers assuming that the scene itself occurred in the universe in slow motion? Or is that just the choice they made to show us all the... Because the way that they're dodge, duck, dip, diving, and dodging around all those jewels that are coming at them pretty high speed, I would imagine. If that's coming at them at regular speed and it's just slowed down for the movie, is really damn impressive. If it's slowed down... in their world too, it's much less impressive, still really cool. Again, one of those things that's not a criticism. I was just really curious how the movie makers wanted me to interpret that. Yeah. I don't think they really, I think it was more for, like, the effect and the amusement and enjoyment of it. And then Jacob's just like, they went that way as they're covered in all of the stuff. Yeah, the line from New York is considerably more interesting than I expected. Great. The whole Rumpin scene, I don't know if you want to talk about any of that. But I mean, it's great. It's great, yeah. But we don't have to talk about the whole Shaw Senate murder thing too in depth. So right before that, because earlier you mentioned, like, the throwback to, like, that era of movies and stuff. That little when they're under the bridge doing the Charlie Chaplin walk. Yeah. And that when you mentioned that brought me back to that. Like, yeah, they kind of threw that in. One thing I was curious about, I may have to harp on this because the Shaw stuff is a plot device that is needed. Imagine if that happened imagine the universe of Fantastic Beasts. Fast forwarded like 50, 60 years. what would the textbooks or the newspapers or like historians say about that? Because everyone saw this dark, unlike a lot of conspiracies that occur, Kennedy assassination, whatever, right? Where you can draw up enough suspicion about another set of events.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like there was a guy with a gun in the room and the guy died of a gunshot, right? This wind conceivably lifted him into the air like a Christ-like kind of hanging thing, shredded him against, like, what would the textbook say about that? Right? Like, would that be how does that story kind of play telephone over the generations?
I'm not sure, because like we assume that they were obliviated in some way, but then you're still having to explain the death of.
But here's the thing. This is again why Pickery is so incompetent. At the subway scene at the end, when the ministry is putting that big bubble up outside the subway, John Voight's Henry Shaw Sr. comes up and says, "That's the thing that killed my son. I'll expose you all for this, for what you did." Which means that he knows still
that he's made the connection.
No, but what that means is no one obliviated him after his son got murdered, or at least changed his memory. Yeah. So he got murdered by quote unquote normal things.
Yeah.
So like the ministry is just blatantly not doing their job.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right.
That was one of the things I noted. Was like, wait a minute, he says that line at the end, but that implies that
he was never.
He still has memory of his son being taken by this ethereal magical force.
Yeah, which was definitely not a gas leak.
Right. So anyway, I thought that was, bad. Makuza for that whole Congress scene or whatever else going on there. Again, Tina, not the most competent, kind of just barges in to the middle of this whole thing without any sort of plan.
And it's like obviously a room that is used for important meetings. It's not just like the office down the hall. It's like this is a room where people meet for important things, and to just end up in there. And then we know that there's people representative from all the magical ministry governments around the world. And it takes someone, nothing against Newt, we know he's very knowledgeable, but it takes him to go, don't mess with me. You know what this is.
Yeah. There's a whole lot that's not ideal from the characters in this scene, right? Again, Tina barging in with no plan, right? Not great. Mm-hmm. Tina not expecting there could be consequences for her there. Not great. Newt kind of trying to flex his knowledge of that explanation. Not great. Then Newt, as he's being dragged off, they're not dangerous. Mm-hmm. Like, just don't yell that, right? That's what.
Well, but he's yelling to not hurt them.
No, right, but like that's like saying, "I didn't do it. I did." You did it, right? You sound guilty by your protestation.
And they've already set up, though, is that this government already has, like, the Ministry of Magic already has opinions of them, because they're like, the Scamander Theseus, the war hero, and they're like, no, the little brother. Like, you could feel that aura of like, yeah, he's the one that got kicked out of Hogwarts. Like, he's not amounting to anything. He's just going to cause more problems.
It's just like Tina did not think a lot of this stuff.
No.
The Graves interrogation scene is one of my favorites every time I watch this movie, because you could parse every single line there and what the motivation for the questions are, right?
And you see the connection Newt is, where he's like, something's not right.
Yeah, I mean, the second that Graves says, so it's useless to let the host, right?
Yeah.
They know, and that's why he has to sentence them to murder, which, again, kind of odd that there's like this extrajudicial murder process that Graves is allowed to conduct.
Yeah, and he like sentenced 2 people, including one of the employees.
Yeah, well, former employee. She'd been fired.
Yeah, she had been fired, but still, you would think they were like, there should probably be a little more investigation there.
Odd that during the interrogation, those 2 like administrative assisted murderers are allowed in the room. The woman, Bernice, what's her name?
I think that sounds right.
They feel like they're like, for lack of better phrasing, nurses who help you commit basically like a form of magical execution.
Yeah.
Right? They shouldn't be in the interrogation room. They should be right outside. And then he calls them in. Why are they allowed to hear all the privy details there?
And they're not questioning his all of a sudden, like, because you see it happen is...
He realizes he was caught.
You see Newt clicks everything. makes a sentence, adds Tina in just because, and they're right there and they're like, no, this sounds right.
Queenie saying to Jacob, of course not. You're one of us now. Like, great line. Like, one of the ones that, like, belongs in, like, a highlight reel of, like, if you tell the story, if you were to put together, like, once all the movies are done being made for this, if you were to put together, like, a 10-minute supercut that demonstrated kind of the plot of all the movies, that feels like one that's at the front end.
Yeah.
One thing that didn't work for me throughout this movie was the Credence Obscurial camera, where, like, you were the Obscurial going through New York, which is, like, it just didn't, it felt rudimentary to me. Like, I liked much better when you saw from above
how
like,
it was affecting. Yes.
Like, I liked that. I didn't like when you were the Obscurial. Like, it just didn't, I don't know. It felt very mid-2000s to me.
Well, it's also, like, it's one thing when you're seeing the damage happen, you understand that there's, like, something's going on. When you are the cause, like, from the perspective of the damage, you're like, I don't know why we're doing this. I don't know what like, we're not sure what this character's motivation is. We know they don't like this one, but it's weird.
What was the name of the bar again? You said
The Blind Pig.
The Blind Pig?
I think so.
I don't know. Whatever it was, I want to drink there. That's where I want to go. The way that they do the magic, the women do the magic. The way the women do the magic to reveal their dresses or whatever, brilliant. Like, I thought that was really good.
I love the Newt adding in the bow tie.
Yeah, like the place was found, and this is where you get Ron Perlman as Narlac, who I think is the perfect voice actor for that scene. Jacob saying, "I love house elves. My uncle's a house elf." Like, just hilarious.
Yeah.
When Queen is like, "Are there other no-mages like you?" He goes, "No, I'm the only one like me." He's trying to be super suave. Knocks back the giggle water. Great, absolutely great. Anything else on the bar?
No, I love the feel of it. Like, it definitely feels very speakeasy.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
Even the music style is perfect.
And again, I'm not breaking any new ground here, people, but if you ever find yourself in London, there's a world-renowned speakeasy there called Nightjar, and it is one of the best speakeasies in the world. It's been, like, I don't know who adjudicates those things, but it's been adjudicated as such. Phenomenal. They have, like, a live jazz band down there sometimes, like a little, just a crooner and, like, a couple instruments. The cocktail program is top-notch. If you ever find yourself in Tampa, really good speakeasy called Ciros there, which similar vibe to Nightjar. I once struck up a friendship with a bartender at Ciros, and she was telling me that they actually designed Ciros to be inspired by Nightjar, so that makes sense. But if you have any other good speakeasy recommendations anywhere around the world, creatingmagicpodcast@gmail.com, Creating Magic Podcast on Instagram, I would love to hear them.
The Pickett moment always is like a heartstring puller for me, because we've seen that relationship. And then we later on see the apologizing. And now we have to go find Dougal.
Yeah, I think the whole Demi-guys thing is cool, that, like, it sees probability, like, really fascinating. I don't really give a damn about the whole alchemy size thing, like, whatever. It was fine. Again, this is where it's like, I care about animals. I love animals. But I don't really care about creatures in this world. Like, it doesn't do it for me.
Yeah, it doesn't, but, like, it also makes sense because, like, Tina was like, we need to get all your creatures so that they can stop pinning this on you. And it was a nice way to get back into the case, putting all the creatures back. And then you have that Lita Lestrange moment.
Well, that's what I wrote here. It's fascinating. This movie, and it's a shame. Look, we're not going to talk about the second one yet. We'll talk about the second one when we review the second one. Knowing what we know now with what happened in the second movie and how much of a train wreck that was, this movie really sets up the series in a way that was super promising. Like, that little Lita Lestrange moment, any Harry Potter fan who hears the word Lestrange, right, your ears perk up, right? I think you get enough of a taste of some of the big players at MACUSA to where, like, you're setting up storylines there, right? This whole dialogue around how restrictive the statute of secrecy and no-maj magic relations in the U.S., like, there's a lot of great stuff.
Yeah.
A lot. And we'll get to Crimes of Grindelwald when we get to it. Like, watching the Lita Lestrange thing, which is just one example, I was like, oh my God, like, they did this really well. Like, because they could have very easily just had her show up in the second movie without any sort of introduction. And still, they could do enough work to where you build a backstory. But putting her here prepares you for her in the next movie in a really smart way.
It does. And then it also is showing how their friendship is growing, because now Queenie is able to read Newt pretty easily. And yes, she does say that it's easier when people are hurting. But you see that they've really formed this bond. And then we get that throw in of the Ilvermorny Hogwarts hogwash, which is just like a fun little
Yeah, you know, the next scene with Credence and Graves, that's where Graves' true motivation, or at least not necessarily true, but you no longer think, is he a good guy or a bad guy? You know he's a bad guy at that point.
You know there's ulterior motives for everything he's done.
I thought that was really well done. Again, here, this is where I was wondering what was digital versus what was practical, because all the brick exploding and all that.
I think the choice of having the fight like in the subway was really good.
Yeah, well, before we even get there, right, I thought like the wand fight between Tina and Graves in the streets of New York.
Yes.
It was just a little back. It wasn't a lot, but it was really good. I think one of the things that they did with Fantastic Beasts that you saw towards the end of the Potter franchise is you've removed a lot of the very elongated, blatant spell casting, where like you take like think it's very exaggerated, but from like the Dueling Club in Chamber of Secrets, point, step, cast, shout. Yeah. Right now, it's still
it's like less.
It's very natural. Like you're just flipping your wrist, flinging spells. Like the way that Graves kind of dispels them with like a dismissive, like it feels a lot more real. And perhaps a lot of that is the CGI that they're able to, for the wand, for the incantation, all that is able to catch up to the time. But I thought that was really, really well done.
Yeah, it was like, and it's also like, it's not that was bad.
It was never bad.
But it was like also like they're learning. So you're like, okay, this is fine. But now you can see like these are adults who have been in this world and this is muscle memory now. And it felt very natural for it to be that way.
Yeah, exactly. I love something we don't see in the Potter films that we see apparating, but what we didn't see was like Newt's like sprinting across buildings and apparating to keep up with.
Yes,
like, that was really cool.
I love that chase, like the running through New York scene.
Yeah. Again, this is where I have Pickery being just deeply incompetent. The battle in the subway, outstanding. I thought it was really, really cool. I thought everything from the visual of the way that Credence kind of is like creeping down the walls, like that smoke was really cool. It
was like smoke. It reminded me of like the edges of the Dementor's cloaks, like that very like creepy crawly infestation almost.
Yeah, I agree. I thought a lot of the way the spells almost felt electric, and the way they were lighting up the subway tile or the rails was really, really, really well done. Anything else you want to talk about right here?
Well, we're going right into the reveal. So why don't we go to your...
Well, so the only thing I want to say is, again, we're not going to do the whole Johnny Depp thing here tonight. I am dealing, for the sake of this conversation, solely within the factual realm that we live in, which is whether you agree, disagree, or feel somewhere in the middle, Warner Brothers decided to cast Johnny Depp, then fire Johnny Depp, then hire Mads Mikkelsen. That's it. I'm not doing that. My question is, I mean, don't get me wrong. I think Mads Mikkelsen is a horrifying, deeply creepy, cold, haunting man. And I think he will do very well in this role. Why didn't they just bring back Colin Farrell?
I had thought of that, and I feel like because he was in a disguise and it was a very different character, that like going to what we know as where he's gone as Grindelwald, I don't know if he has like that like, as you said, like that haunting like feel to him. And then it might be more confusing if all of a sudden they're like, well, why is it back to this guy? Because they're going to have to keep the look.
I agree. But is it not more confusing to have a whole different character, a whole different person in that character that you haven't seen before? Right? Like you could write into the plot something, like if Colin Farrell showed up with frosted blonde hair and put on some contacts, whatever, right? And made him look slightly more like Deps Grindelwald, you can write into the story why he all of a sudden looks more like Graves again. Mm-hmm. Right? Mads Mikkelsen showing up looking nothing, I'm presuming, based on the couple teaser trailers we've seen, right? Looking nothing like Deps Grindelwald is more confusing insofar as it's a different person entirely, looking a different way, playing the same character.
Yeah.
I'm all about Mads Mikkelsen. It felt like the path of least resistance would have been, let's go give Colin Farrell a boatload of money.
Yeah.
Maybe he was busy. I don't know what he's working on. Maybe he said no. I don't know. But that feels like it would have been more natural
of a choice. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. I get that. Then Frank obliviates everyone.
Again, Pickery, deeply incompetent. Pickery had no way to obliviate the whole city. She says it in the scene.
Yeah.
If not for Newt and his birds, which 10 minutes ago, she was ready to kill all of them and kill him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what she does. They're at war, according to her. And then again, incompetence. When she goes now get out of New York. A competent person says, I'm going to escort you out of New York.
Yeah.
Not, hey, time for you to go.
Or even make sure you obliviate the other guy over there.
Well, that felt, and we don't want to jump ahead to Crimes of Grindelwald and the upcoming Secrets of Dumbledore, but it is spoiler. If you have not yet seen Crimes of Grindelwald, for whatever reason, it came out like 4 years ago, where y'all at? But spoiler. Jacob has his memories in Crimes of Grindelwald. So he was hit with the Frank tears. Yeah. Somehow he got them back. We don't exactly know how that happened. Right?
We don't know the how. We know he had some memory because of the bakery. We're like, you got nifflers that don't exist.
Right, which then seems to contradict. There's some magical continuity, canonical thing. We don't have the answer. But point is, to me, I read her saying rules are rules, he has to be obliviated too, almost as like in Game of Thrones when Qhorin Halfhand says to Jon, you kill Ygritte. And Jon says, you knew I didn't kill her. He says, yeah, that's why I left you alone.
Yeah.
He knew
it feels like that.
It feels like Pickery's like, yeah, obliviate him, but you don't have to.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, obviously it's a fake character. We're never going to know the answer, but I'm curious if she genuinely meant obliviate him or if that was like, okay, I'm just going to turn away and not look.
Yeah.
I'm telling you this is the rule, but okay,
But it's also, so you're like, she's a rule follower, so.
I didn't know what to make of that.
Kind of, he obliviated himself, essentially. He's the one that made the steps to walk out.
Well,
Yeah, no, I know. One of my favorite moments in that movie, right before that, is where Jacob's like, everybody knows Newt only kept me around because, hey, Newt, why did you keep me around? Because I like you, because you're my friend, and I'll never forget how you helped me, Jacob. And I love that little moment between them.
Yeah. And that's really it. Right? You get Queenie at Kowalski's Bakery.
I do love the repairing of the New York scene. I will say, I love watching that.
Again,
I just like watching magic.
Yeah.
I think that's what it comes down to.
Pickery seems to contradict herself because she's like, we can't obliviate everyone and fix all this. But then 2 seconds later, Newt has obliviated everyone for her, and then her orders are fixing the entire city like that.
My question that was always this, I'm like, but they're out in the rain, so aren't they getting obliviated?
But then also, if people who aren't in the rain, what happens to them? What happens if you're sitting inside your house and you see all this happen outside your window? You see the what? You see
the guy in the shower and then the lady drinking water. So you're just, in my head, I just went, it's in the drinking water now. But I guess.
But her water was already in the cup. You're right. They went for a water symbolism thing there. But it really doesn't make a ton of sense if you think about it.
Yeah.
So, but what happens if none of them were? What happens for if you were just sitting at your window, looking out the window, and all of a sudden you see,
New York skyscraper being fixed.
Right. Like steel going backwards and up.
Yeah.
You didn't get touched by again, it's not a criticism, but it's one of the many things that happen in terms of the continuity and the canonical story of magic in this movie that are very fascinating that they don't answer.
Yeah.
right? Like much like how does the Ministry geographically and physically work? There's a lot of things where it's like, well, how did that? And it's not a problem, I don't think.
No.
It's just, something I was curious about.
What are your thoughts going into?
Well, no, who won the movie?
Oh, who won? I forgot.
For you, 3 questions. Who won the movie? Favorite scene? Most surprising thing?
Who won the movie? For me, it's going to be Newt. I love his character. And I think the quad as a full set easily won it also. But I really love Newt. Favorite scene? I really, and it has like no like necessary addition to the script. I love when they're in the case and like just Newt taking care of his animals and Jacob's like, yeah, I'll go feed these random moon calves. I don't even know what they are, but I just love those little interactions. What surprised me, I don't know if anything necessarily surprised me. I still enjoyed it a lot. Like this movie hasn't like gone up or down on my list of things. Like it's still a movie I'll regularly put on. It doesn't get like pushed to the back. Like I don't know. What about you?
Yeah, I think David Yates won the movie. Don't get me wrong. As we've covered, I like a lot of the later Potter films, right? Like Order, his first movie that he's part of, I really liked. Right, both Deathly Hallows I liked. Half-Blood Prince I liked. That said, so maybe it's not David Yates so much as it is the cinematographer Philippe Rousselot, because I didn't like in those movies a lot of the color choices, a lot of the filter and all that. I thought this movie was beautiful. I thought this movie was, the poster I had for this movie with Newt standing on top of a building with the sunrise or sunset kind of off to his right, holding his case, it's gorgeous. This movie is such a great either introduction for people into the Wizarding world or reintroduction into the Wizarding world. And I think if you're someone like us who's being reintroduced, you don't love that you have to question all these things about how does the magic work. If you're being introduced either as a kid or as an adult for the first time, you probably love that those questions aren't answered neatly, like because it allows your creativity and your imagination to run. So I probably the cinematographer, my boy Philippe. Favorite scene? There's a lot. I don't know. It was really tough for me to pick one that differentiated. I would probably say the entire apartment scene with Tina and Queenie and Newt and Jacob, because of how much it tells us about how the movie makers are setting up the different relationships and how characters relate to each other and what they react to, and being able to see magic through Jacob's eyes and the sheer brilliance of it all and the surreal of it all. I thought that was really, really good. For what surprised me, honestly, how much I liked it. Right, this movie is far more so than the second movie heavy on creatures. And again, it's not that I dislike animals. I really do love animals, but like we have a lot of friends in the Harry Potter community who could tell you every single thing you ever want to know about a hippogriff, or will be able to name all the things you need to feed a pygmy puff in order to, like that's just not me. Yeah. I don't come to these stories for the creatures of it all. But this movie was really it surprised me in how character driven it was and how beautiful it was, and despite the plot not necessarily being the strongest plot in the world, I thought how well focused it was.
Yes. Right.
Like there's only a couple deviations that kind of feel either out of place or in retrospect, having seen the second movie, don't appear relevant. But I thought this movie was really, really well focused and driven.
Yeah, I really do. I love the character development, even in just this movie of those 4, and seeing on where they started and where they end in this movie. Crimes of Grindelwald. Do you recall the last time you watched it?
I don't know, a couple of years ago, a year ago. I don't.
So what are your thoughts going into?
It's a canonical mess. It is a canonical mess. Somewhat similarly to how in a couple of the Potter films, there are times where the spell cast isn't the spell that we see displayed on screen, visualized on screen. It's like that times 1,000 in Crimes of Grindelwald. Like McGonagall being a professor who shouldn't be alive. Like there's just so many things. It's like, well, how, why?
Mm-hmm.
There are some cinematography choices that, despite being beautiful, I think there were a lot of choices made, as I remember from that movie, that were made with the beauty on screen as the driving reason, rather than the plot and or the magical continuity. The whole Mustafa Kama plot line doesn't make any sense to me no matter how many times I watch it. He appears in the teaser trailers for Secrets of Dumbledore, so hopefully that gets a little more cleared up and his role becomes more preeminent. But the whole, is that the Titanic? Is that not the Titanic? Weird subplot where the baby, there's a whole lot going on in that movie where it's not questions of, well, how does the magic work? It's
what's going on?
What the hell is going on?
Yeah.
So it's not as bad as having to go through Azkaban or Goblet and having to watch Gambit, but it's pretty dang close. What about you?
It also, from what I remember, it feels like it drags a bit. This one did not feel like a drag. I felt like I was in it the whole time. So not necessarily looking forward to it. I remember being excited to see it in the theaters, but mostly because the trailer had that moment where you saw, I remember when all of us saw that trailer where we're like, we're going back. Hogwarts is there. We are all very excited. We get to see young Dumbledore. That was all super exciting. But this movie has so many other issues that are part of. There is one scene that I love watching, so I'm excited to watch that again. But yeah, it's going to be.
I'll give you two things I am excited for. I'm excited for to see Jude Law.
Yes.
Say what you will, people. And I'm a big fan of Jude Law's Dumbledore. I really, really am. It works really damn well for me. 2, I'm excited for you to be able to tell the story you started to tell at the beginning of this podcast. Next podcast.
Sounds good. And then.
All right. End the episode.
Now, if you two don't mind, I'm going to bed before either of you come up with another clever idea to get us killed. Or worse, expelled.